Hello there, it's Juliana Michaels and I'm so happy you're here. In this video, I'm sharing how to create a cool oxidized background. I'm also sharing another rusty, crusty, grungy effect similar to the one I shared recently. I'll link to that video in the description box below just in case you missed it. They are pretty similar, I just used slightly different mediums to get the same effect and thought you might enjoy learning another option to achieve that same look. As always, you can follow along using your stash of supplies. However, if you are interested in any of the products I'm using in this video, you can find the complete supply list with links in the description box below. Your support when you shop through those links means so much to me. If you're only interested in the process and not the supplies I'm using, skip ahead to around the 5-minute mark and you'll be close to where the making begins. So the stamp sets I'm going to be working with on this card are the Deconstructed stamp set by Tim Holtz and Hodgepodge. Along with the stamp sets, the two die sets I'm going to be using is the Vault Picture Wheel and the Vault Boutique. And I'm going to be using this little flourishes and some of these little butterflies and then this film strip piece. Again, with any of these, you could totally use different stamps, dies, and customize it to make it your own. The mediums we're going to be working with on this card are Distress Ink and Ground Espresso, and then Distress Oxide in Salvage Patina and Frayed Burlap. Also going to be using translucent grit paste and the Foundry Wax in Mind. And then we're going to be doing some heat embossing, and you can use a clear embossing ink pad or even this VersaFine Clair pigment ink pad, because a pigment ink is kind of a sticky, so the ink or a powder will stick to that as well. You definitely want a black ink pad for part of it, or you can use the clear for all of it and then use clear embossing powder and black embossing powder. So you can kind of have some substitutions here depending on maybe what you have or don't have for the embossing. And then of course you can switch out the colors and use any kind of colors you like. And if you don't have the oxide inks, the Distress ink won't really work for this technique, because the Distress ink won't really work for this technique. The ink is a different formulation, so because there's pigment in the oxide inks, it's going to show up on the black paper that we're going to be using, and it's more opaque, whereas regular Distress ink is more translucent, so it doesn't show up on black cardstock at all. If you don't have ink pads, though, you could, if you do have the oxide sprays, that's another option as well. Another thing you could probably also use would be paint. No, scratch that. Alrighty. So the tools I'm going to be using is a distress sprayer, a little blending brush, palette knife, and then a short bristle paintbrush. The papers I'm going to be working with are Distress Black Heavy Stock, which is just a gorgeous dark black paper that can handle wet mediums. It is a little bit pricey though, so I'm saving it and using it only on the panel that you can see. Then you'll need a little small piece of just some white heavy stock or white cardstock that you can use for the sentiment, and then a black cardstock to do the die cutting with, and then a piece of craft heavy stock to layer to just kind of make that cardstock a little bit heavier. I also use some scraps of the black heavy stock to do the die cutting for the butterflies, and I also mounted the card onto a piece of this, but I trimmed out and kind of made a frame, so I cut out the center of the paper and used that and like saved that to use for other things, so that I didn't waste any of that paper behind where you wouldn't be able to see it. For the background, I'm going to place that black heavy stock into my stamping platform here. And then the stamp set I'm going to be working with is the Hodgepodge stamp set. And as you can see, like it's kind of pretty much takes up all of the stamping platform, so you really can't use your magnets in here. So I'm just gonna get that attached to my stamp platform. And then to keep my cardstock from sliding around accidentally, I'm gonna put a little bit of that scrapbook.com's dotted adhesive, which is kind of just a little bit of a temporary adhesive on the back side to help kind of hold that in place. So now we're gonna stamp the image with the Versamark watermark stamp pad, but any kind of embossing ink pad will work. I'm just going to apply the ink to my paper here. And then a good press down. Because this is such a large stamp, you may need to stamp it a couple times just to get a good coverage, which is why it's important to make sure everything's not sliding around when you do the stamping. So I actually even have my paper held in place with some mint tape there. It's just like kind of a temporary low tack tape, but you could use washi tape as well. Because again, like can't really use the magnets in here at all. Okay, once you have a good impression, and we can pull this up, set this to the side. I'm gonna place this on top of a piece of computer printer paper, and I'm just gonna pour that clear embossing powder over my background. I kind of pick that up and tap it down. That'll cover the rest of the image. Kind of missed any spots. You can go back and add a little bit more there maybe. There we are. And now you can pour that extra powder back into your jar. And if you get any powder on your desk, Swiffer is a great way to kind of wipe that off. And now I'm going to take my heat tool and heat emboss this paper, and I'm just kind of working over this kitchen trivet just to protect my work surface. Okay, and then now we have our heat embossed background, which quite honestly looks pretty cool as is, but we're gonna zhuzh it up a little bit, I guess you'd say, with some, and add a little distress and grunge to it. All right, so now for the background, we're gonna need the distress sprayer and then our two oxide pads here. So we're gonna do an ink smushing technique. So we're gonna start off with the frayed burlap and just get a little bit of that onto our craft mat. And we're gonna spritz that with water. And then we're gonna smush your paper into the ink. And let's kind of get it tapped in. You can also wipe it through if you like. Just kind of depends on what kind of effect you look. So if you wipe it through at this point especially, it's really gonna smear it. But you can also spritz this with a little water if you want to get it moving. And then we're gonna dry that with a heat tool. So once you have that mostly dry, I'm gonna just kind of clean this up. And then we're gonna repeat that with the salvaged patina. And For this, I'm going to kind of see how I kind of have some areas that don't have anything on them. So I'm going to kind of try to dab in the paper into those areas a little bit. There we are. And then we're going to dry that. And you'll see as this dries, that vibrance of the colors kind of fades out a little bit. And that's just the nature of the oxide inks and working on this black cardstock. I really love this kind of oxidized, chalky effect you get from the oxide inks. And then if you want to, get a little more ink in some areas, just dab again and give it a go. And then just realize that at this point, when you dab into those other areas where you had the frayed burlap, you're going to kind of start getting a mix of some of those colors. And you can also use your finger to kind of finger paint some of that on if there's some areas where you want to add some color specifically. It's kind of one of my favorite ways of doing some of this. And then we'll dry that again. So here is a look at the finished background. Now you might notice here in the corner, I didn't get a really good stamped image there, but it still turns out pretty cool. So don't fret if your embossing powder and ink and all that, it's not perfect everywhere. So it still gives you a really cool grungy background. So off camera, I did some die cutting. These are the embellishments that we're going to be creating for the card. And again, I used the Vault Picture Show and Vault Boutique die sets, but you could use any die set you have for these techniques. And I'm going to take these pieces and I'm going to glue these layers together just to give these die cuts a little more bulk and thickness so that they can kind of stand up to the technique that I'm going to use on them. And then to glue these together, I'm just using Distress Collage Medium. Got it in my Sweet Petunia glue press. I filled one of the like an empty bottle with the collage medium, and because that's kind of my preferred liquid adhesive. Get that lined up there. All right, and then I'm just going to repeat that for the rest of these. As I mentioned earlier in the video, I'm using a less expensive black cardstock. You could still use that black heavy stock if you like. It's pretty pricey, so I try to save it for special techniques and things like that. Now we're going to add some Distress Grit Paste in translucent. And just gonna kind of rub that on here with my palette knife and just get a nice little coverage here and there. I don't want to cover the entire piece like solid, but just kind of add like a grungy texture to it. And then we'll set that to the side to dry. I'm just going to repeat that on all of these die cuts. And I have a piece, if you're wondering what that plastic stuff is, that's just some press and steel that I've cut a piece of it and kind of push it down into the paste, so that kind of helps keep the jar from drying out. Because once you open these and air gets in there, they will dry out. These pastes do not last forever. So if you have them and you're not using them, you might want to and you've opened them already, you might want to pull them out and play along with me here. So, because yeah, they don't last forever. And then where that paste is like kind of in between, like an open area and there's nothing there, we'll clean that up later, so don't worry about that. Now, if you don't have the translucent paste, you could also use the opaque, which is just like the regular, but it's gonna dry white, where this is gonna dry clear. So now we're just gonna set that to the side and let it dry. For the sentiment, I'm just using a scrap of white cardstock, and then I'm gonna be using this side up stamp from the deconstructed stamp set. And I'm just gonna stamp that onto this paper using the black VersaFine pigment ink and clear embossing powder. Another option is you could use regular embossing ink and black embossing powder. So I'm using black ink and clear embossing powder here though. And pigment ink will work because it's really thick and kind of a sticky ink. So the powder will stick to it just like it does an embossing ink pad. And get it one more time, get it good. I want it really nice and dark. There we go. Place this over my printer paper and sprinkle it with the clear embossing powder. And kind of tap off the excess. And we can put that back in the jar. And now I'm just going to heat emboss this. And now I'm just going to use a pair of scissors and trim this out. And these are the new Tim Holtz recoil scissors, which are super comfortable to cut with. You can do a little bit of fussy cutting like I'm doing here. They're not my favorite for like really detailed fussy cutting, but to just cut out a little something like this, and it's kind of a simple shape, they're perfect. And like I said, they're so comfortable to cut with and hold. So there we are. And now we're going to do a little ink smushing with this. So I'm just going to get a little bit of frayed burlap and a little of the Salvage Patina Oxide inks on there. Spritz this little water. And I'm just going to dab this in a little bit. Grab my tweezers and I'm just going to dry this. And I'm gonna smush it down into some of the Salvage Patina. Get a little of that on there. Like I did earlier, you know, you can also use your finger to paint some on if you want color in certain areas. And we'll dry that. So the ink isn't really going to stick to the areas that are embossed, so let's clean this up here. Once you're all finished with the heat embossing, just let that cool down for a second, and then you can just take a kind of a damp towel, just kind of grab like a clean area if you're reusing something, and then just kind of lightly wipe over the surface, and that'll kind of remove anything that might be on the surface that you don't want rubbing off. And then you can also do the same thing here. And then the only thing you're wiping off is what you know, is sitting on top of the embossing powder. I mean, you might get a little bit coming off the background, but it's not gonna take off all the ink, and then so it can kind of bring some of that shine back, because it does kind of go away if there's a lot of that ink on top. You can also kind of like dab, like if you're seeing like that a lot of it's smearing, just kind of dab. You could just kind of dab over the surface and lift off what's on top of the embossed areas. So now this is all ready. Now our grit paste is dry, and so now we're gonna add some interest to this. And as I mentioned, like where those areas where it's kind of hanging over, if you want to, you know, you can just grab, you know, tweezers or something, even scissors, and kind of just knock that stuff off if you want. Or you can leave it hanging off. It really doesn't matter. It's really up to you. So the first thing we're gonna do here is we're gonna add some of that Mind Foundry wax. I just got a little brush there, and I'm gonna just put some of this onto my craft mat. Oops. All right, well, I'll get that off later. And then you're just gonna kind of stipple this onto the cardstock. If you want to use your finger, you can. Up to you. You'll notice this stuff kind of dries quickly, so once it starts drying, you might need to add a little bit more. And then just continue that on all the pieces. I'm not going for full coverage. As you can see, I'm trying to still leave some of the black showing, but at the same time kind of trying to get it on some of the paste as well. And when you're working with this, you don't really want to leave that bottle open for a long period of time, because it will dry out. So just kind of something to keep in mind. And if you're not super familiar with this, now at this point, this is dry on here, but it's not permanent. It will rub off. What's on this mat will rub off as well. It just kind of turns into like a powder and disappears. And like if there is any little bit on here that is not coming off, you can clean that off with some rubbing alcohol. But to make this permanent and to really get the full effect of what this does, you need to heat set it. So I recommend using a heat embossing gun, and then I'm just going to hold this with some tweezers, because these are tiny little pieces, and then just apply the heat, and you'll see, because like right now, like it's not shiny at all, but it will be once we apply the heat. So there you can see how it turned shiny with that heat applied to it. So I'm just going to repeat that on all the rest of these pieces. Now we're going to add some Distress Crayon and Rusty Hinge, and I'm gonna just kind of rub that here and there over. Over the pieces. You can also use your fingers, kind of smear that around a little bit. And then we're gonna do that same thing with some salvage patina. And this time I'm just gonna go a little bit lighter with it. So just kind of very lightly rub it kind of over the surface so that it just kind of gets some of the highlighted areas, or just to highlight some of the areas, not kind of hits the higher points. But you can also get it down in those little lower spots too. It doesn't really matter, but there's really not a lot of rhyme or reason to this. Just kind of, you can add and continue layering and just keep playing with this until you're happy with how it looks really. And so there's kind of a little bit of a close-up look at the kind of rusty, grungy frames we created and the little flourish pieces. And then from here, then it's just a matter of assembling the card with all the various pieces we've created, just using a combination of collage medium and some foam adhesive to kind of pop up the sentiment piece and the little butterflies. So here's what I was referring to earlier. I used that black heavy stock also as a matte layer for this card, and I trimmed my background panel down to 4 by 5 1/4 inches, and then I took a piece of the black heavy stock, cut it to 4 1/4 by 5 1/2 inches, and then I took a craft knife and just kind of cut out the center piece, and then I saved that to use for, you know, other things. And instead of wasting all that paper that would be covered up. So just a little tip to save some of your paper and save some money. Another little tip, if you find that the crayon and stuff is like rubbing off in your hands and it's kind of bothering you or whatever, you could seal it with some collage medium. So that's what's in my precision press. And you know, you can just squirt a little dab around and then just use your finger and kind of cover over those areas. You could also take a little brush and paint it on if you like as well. So just an idea for kind of how to seal the crayon, because the crayon doesn't really dry. It's kind of reacts really easily. So I thought this would work, and it did. So I'm gonna just to keep that from smearing around too much. Of course, it would be a little easier to do that before you assemble everything, but yeah, just a little tip for you. Here's a look at the completed card. As I mentioned in the video, I trimmed the background panel down to 4 by 5 1/4 inches and mounted it onto a piece of black heavy stock cut to 4 1/4 by 5 1/2 inches. I then adhered the various embellishments using a combination of liquid and double-sided foam adhesive. I also added a few small butterflies die cut from black heavy stock. Which technique will you try first, the oxidized background or the rusty crusty effect? I can't wait to see it, and make sure you tag me on social media if I've inspired you. Thanks so much for watching. Don't forget to hit the subscribe button so you can join me on a more regular basis. Hit the like if you enjoyed this video, and if you want to join me on my other social media platforms, you can find the links to those in the description box below. Also, feel free to leave me a comment if you have any questions or if there's something you'd love to share with me and our community. I'll see you in the comments below and in the next video. Until next time, stay crafty, my friend.